See about that. An official welcome, everybody. Good to see you. Thanks for being here. We're going to jump right into the first of what will be, I believe, a three-part lesson. It may be more. Right now, I sense 3 parts. And it's probably a series that I should have begun with a year and a half ago. In retrospect, Dennis, we should have begun this a year and a half ago. But sometimes we mature in our faith, and we learn a little bit more than what we knew before. So it's being released tonight. And as you know, this year, this calendar year at the Kingdom Institute, we've stated that this is the year of the kingdom. We're going to focus on kingdom. That's going to be the main theme throughout the year. Not every week, but almost every week. The kingdom. This is the first of a 3-part series of our first series on the kingdom. And I'm going to make a very bold statement to you. And I believe it can be justified. There are dozens and dozens of kingdom principles. There's a lot of kingdom principles. But I submit to you what we're going to focus on tonight in the next 2 weeks is the, capital T, capital H, capital E, the kingdom principle. This is the principle that all of the principles in one way or another evolve from. Now, I don't like to say the. These are the 5 steps. Well, there are 5 that I know, but there's probably 72 I don't. So I'm careful on the. But I'm going to be bold just to help grab your attention, but also to plant this deep. If you get this, you'll see. Does anybody know Matthew 6:33 by heart? Does anybody know Matthew 6:33? Clint, you know that? What is it?
Yes, sir.
Seek you.
Now you go ahead.
To seek ye first the kingdom and its righteousness, and all things will be added to you.
Jesus said, Matthew 6:33, get this, seek ye first to make a living.
Wow.
Seek ye first to raise good kids. Seek ye first to find a good spouse. Seek ye first to build your 401k retirement plan. You see where this is going?
Yes.
Seek ye first the kingdom and his righteousness. And then all these things will be added to you. When you look back at the earlier part of Matthew 6, what were these other things that Jesus was talking about? What came just before that? What were some of those things?
Clothing.
What you wear,
Wow.
what you eat,
Wow.
where you live.
Wow.
Seek ye first,
Wow.
and all those things will be added. Wait a minute. Who does that addition?
God.
We don't.
Right.
He does. Now, I'm laying it on you right now because this is where we're going for a couple of weeks. Seek ye first the kingdom, and then all these things will be added unto you. I suggest the kingdom principle
The kingdom principle.
is sowing and reaping. May I be so bold as to suggest what comes at the top of the kingdom is sowing and reaping. And I'm going to lay a foundation tonight of just some foundational truths, just 5, of sowing and reaping. And in the next couple of lessons, we'll look at sowing and then reaping. So we'll see how this goes. Let's look at some foundational truths, foundational lessons, foundations on sowing and reaping. Number 1, the first foundational truth. Sowing and reaping is a law. It's a covenant promise. God made a covenant of sowing and reaping. When God sets a law and a covenant, it's irrevocable. It can never not be. Sowing and reaping under the same, number 1, a covenant promise. Here's where a lot of believers have problems. It's for everybody. It's not only irrevocable, it can't change, it's never going to, but It's for everybody. Have you ever noticed anybody in business you're up in business against, or maybe your competitors or someone you read about, that is about as lost as a goose in a snowstorm? But they made a lot of money. They're at the top of their profession. Is that fair? Is that fair?
By God's word, it is.
Somehow or another, even they stepped into this sowing and reaping. They sowed into good ground, and it came up, even though they're lost. See, it's irrevocable. It's for everybody.
Yeah.
Even the unsaved.
Wow.
And when you sow and reap, this is still under number 1. It's a covenant promise. This is part of the covenant promise. It's irrevocable. Even when you're saved or not saved, it still works because it's God's law, not man's. It's God's law. And God's law is always exceedingly abundantly above all that we can think or ask or imagine. Is that how we look at our business? Is that how we look at our profession? Is that how we look at our life? That we have exceeding abundance? Or are we just trying to make a living? Or we're just trying to pay our bills? Or we're saying, oh yeah, I believe in all that, but first thing in the morning, what do you seek? What's the first thing in the morning you seek? Typically, it's coffee.
We're busted.
Or the bathroom. Or the bathroom. Some of us seek the bathroom first. I can't believe I said that on a recording. But it's the truth.
Sets you free.
It's the truth.
It sets you free.
Well, it sure helps. It sure helps. What do you seek first thing in the morning? Oh man, I got to get to work on time. I just got that bill yesterday. How am I going to pay for that? How am I going to take care of that customer?
Right.
Oh no, my kid's in trouble again at school. What am I going to say to the principal? And on and on. Seek ye
First.
because it's exceeding abundantly. And also this covenant promise is for sharing with others to show the goodness of God. Jesus taught in Mark 4. And Jesus said, the kingdom of God is if a man would scatter seed on the ground and should sleep by night and rise by day. He said, man, didn't say saved. Man, anyone. And the seed should sprout and grow. He himself does not know how. Did you get that? That seed's growing, and the man doesn't have to understand how. For the earth yields crops by itself. This shows a piece of God's goodness in terms of the covenant promise. But you say, wait a minute, you're saying it's the kingdom principle? Let me give you just one more verse, a couple of verses back to back, where it all began. Let's go all the way back to Genesis. I want us to get this deep in our spirit, in our heart, in our mind. I want us to transform, be renewed in our mind, that this is what we should first seek. Sowing and reaping is for all of us. And when we're under God's domain, it's exceedingly abundantly. Genesis 1, that's where it all began, right? Verse 28 and 29. Then God blessed them, Adam and Eve, and said to them, number 1, be fruitful and multiply. Sowing, reaping. Sowing. Be fruitful and multiply. Fill the earth and subdue it. Have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds in the air, and over every living thing that moves on the earth. We'll talk a lot more. One of our 3-part series will be on kingdom dominion. What does that mean? We're getting there, but this comes first. And God said, see, I have given you every herb that yields seed, which is the face of the earth, and every tree whose fruit yields seed. To you it shall be your food. I'm giving it to you. Adam tended. sowing and reaping. From the very beginning. The first covenant of God. Sowing and reaping. Does it still work when you put seeds in the ground? Do they still grow?
Yes.
Are we still supposed to multiply? Okay, hold that thought. Because I hadn't even gotten to number 2 yet. The others will go quicker. We got to get this first one just right. Now, this covenant promise. We're still on number 1. The number 1 foundational, if you will, principle. Sowing and reaping as a law, as a covenant, it's guaranteed. It's guaranteed. But it's not the world's system. What do you mean, Jim? It's not the world's system. The Babylonian system of the world is buying and selling. It's the strong over the weak. God's system, the kingdom system is sowing and reaping, serving over leading. It's a completely different way to approach everything. We'll dig more into this later, but I want to let you know, we're living in a Babylonian system. Buy and sell. Man, if I can get a 7% return this year on my investments, wouldn't that be great? 7% is nothing when you're looking at a possible 30, 60, 100 fold when you sow and reap. Number 1, we've got to understand this sowing and reaping is a covenant, it's a law, it's a guarantee, it's a promise. Number two, it's perpetual, it never stops. Sowing and reaping is perpetual, it never stops. Genesis 8:22. Genesis 8:22. While the earth remains, this is after the flood. Genesis 8:22, after the flood, God says, when the earth remains, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, winter and summer, and day and night shall not cease. Everything God created has the ability to grow, to multiply through seed. Everything. Every act of your faith, whether it's in business, family, community, has the potential to multiply forever. Forever. Every act of your life that has operated in a seed principle, whether you are conscious of it or not, will multiply forever. Does that put a different perspective on what we do every day and what we focus on and what we want to see harvest? Does that kind of put a little bit different?
Oh, yeah.
Jesus sowed into 11. At Pentecost, then into 120. Has that ever ended? Now it's into the billions.
Wow.
Sowing and reaping never stops, friends. It never stops. Number 1, it's a covenant promise. It's a law. Number 2, it never stops. Number 3, this is huge. If you grab onto this, this will change the way you look at your circumstances in your life forever. I promise. I'm grabbing onto this myself. Number 3, God never expects you to bear the weight for your provision. God never expects you to bear the weight of your provision. Seek ye first the kingdom, his righteousness, and then what?
All things will be added.
Exodus 16. Exodus 16. So it was that quails came up at evening and covered the camp, and in the morning the day lay all about the camp. The dew lay all about the camp. And when the layer of dew lifted, there on the surface of the wilderness was a small round substance as fine as frost on the ground. I wonder if that was Oreos. You think it was? No, I'm just kidding. So when the children of Israel saw it, I'm just making sure you're still with me. Then they said to one another, what is it? For they did not know what it was. And Moses said to them, here's the key. Remember, we just said, God does not expect you to carry the weight for your provision. God said, this is the bread which the Lord has given you to eat. Under sowing and reaping, you will have a perpetual supply. under sowing and reaping, you will have a perpetual supply. And here's a huge shift. I'm glad some of you are taking some notes, because if you not write nothing else down, this will help you more than anything else as you leave tonight. We must shift from being provision-minded. How am I going to make a living? How am I going to pay my bills? We must shift from being provision-minded into being seed-minded. When you're seed-minded, there's an unlimited future supply. We must make that shift. And it is a very difficult, because none of us have ever lived this way before, I would imagine.
No.
For most of us, probably the first time you ever thought about it this way, like I have learned over the last several months. We must make the shift from being provision-minded. How am I going to get that next client? JD, how am I going to get that next client? How am I going to close that company?
Yeah.
Where's that next contract coming from?
Yeah.
Where's my next pay? Into, where do I want to see a harvest? And what can I plant to get that endless harvest forever? Completely different way to live. Completely different way to live.
That's deep.
Always, every day, all the time, I'm exhorting you, think kingdom, 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 kingdom. Where can I sow? And it's not about finances. We're going to learn that. That's just a small part of it. Where do you want me to sow? Where do you want me to sow? Where can I sow? What have I got to sow? Because when I sow into good ground.
Wow.
But Simon answered in Luke 5:5-7. But Simon answered Peter, Master, we have toiled all night. They've been fishing all night. You know the story. They've been fishing all night. These were professional fishermen, probably multi-generational fishermen. He ran a big business. He had a bunch of partners. I mean, they were professional fishermen. Here comes this preacher boy, if you will, who they don't even know has ever been on a boat. They may have heard he was a carpenter. And tell him to go out and... Well, listen carefully. We just said, God does not expect you to bear the weight of your provision. Listen carefully to the word. We toiled all night and caught nothing. Nevertheless, at your word. Pause for effect. Do you believe his word? I'll never leave you nor forsake you, exceedingly abundantly. I take great pleasure in the prosperity of my servants. Do you believe it? At your word, I'll let down the net, any singular. And when they had done that, a great number of fish, their net was breaking. So they signaled, come on, everybody. And they filled both the boats, or more than both the boats, so they all began to sink. I don't want to get ahead because we're going to have a whole series, 3-part series, it looks like, on kingdom provision. Would you like to hear that too?
Yes.
And kingdom prosperity. What real kingdom prosperity. That's another series. That's where we're going this year, if you're interested. Jesus drew the fish and said, cast your net there. What did Peter sow in this? What was he sowing in this example? What did he sow?
He believed the word.
Obedience, yes, that's good. But I mean, physically, what did he sow? He rowed out his boat and he sowed his net.
Yeah.
And there was obedience, absolutely. But what he sowed? Well, I got a boat, I got a net, I just cleaned them up. Okay. Jesus brought him the harvest. He didn't have to go out and find it. He did not want Peter to have to bear the brunt of providing for his own provision. Doesn't mean he didn't have to work. He worked all night. But he toiled. We've had lessons on toiling is not of the Lord. It's of the devil. It's of the enemy. When it's such a grind, go back and look at some of the other messages. It's such a grind, I just can't. No. That's of the enemy. Prosperity of the servants, look in Proverbs. There's no toil with it. The blessing of the Lord makes one rich, and he adds no sorrow, no toil, there it is, to it. I forgot to put that in the notes. Proverbs 10:22.
Right.
The blessing of the Lord makes one rich, and yes, that does include money.
Wow.
And he adds no sorrow to it. Number 3, God never expects you to bear the weight for your provision. Now that is a different way to look at it too, isn't it? Number 4, no seed planted, no harvest. Well, duh. But I'm planting seeds. I really am. I'm taking seeds and sowing. Well, let me read you a story and see if it might resonate with, ooh, I don't ever do this again. I don't want this to be me again. May I read you a few verses? Matthew 25, 24 to 29. Matthew 25, 24 to 29. Parable of the talents. Let's look at the third boy, all right? Then he who had received the 1 talent came and said, Lord, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you have not sown. Well, when you sow, it's going to reap. It's going to reap. And gathering where you have not scattered seed. Well, guess what? There were other seeds that were... This was an example. This was an example of sowing and reaping. He just happened to see the guy do it. It may have been in another field. And someone from that field took that seed and put it over here. I didn't see you plant that seed over here. But the seed had to be planted. So even that was... The guy wasn't right on that. All right? And I was afraid. And I went and I hid your talent. He said, I hid your talent. It wasn't mine. It's God's talent. It's Jesus' talent that he's letting you sow. You getting this now? Look, I'm bringing it back to you. And the Lord said, you wicked and lazy servant. You knew that I reap where I have not sown and gather where I have not scattered seed. Can I be the 3rd or 4th or 5th generation of that seed? Who knows? Because it's endless, right? Who knows where the original seed was planted? See how this is... I'm suggesting a new mindset on this, a new perspective. At least you could have put in the bank, it would have gotten interest. Take that talent from him and give to the one with 10. Is that fair? Of course it is.
Yes.
If you took your $100,000 portfolio into a stockbroker and they returned 0 that year, and your buddy over here has $100,000 and that stockbroker received, made it turn that $100,000 into $1 million legally, would it be wrong to take your $100,000 and put it over here with that other stockbroker to get a bigger ROI? No. It's funny that Jesus was talking about investment, return on investment, marketplace. This was this was, at least in Matthew, the last recorded parable, the parable of the talents, the last recorded parable before he entered Jerusalem for his crucifixion. The very last recorded was a marketplace parable on money and return on investment. Isn't that interesting? If you do nothing with your seed, it's going to be taken from you. If you do nothing with your seed, it's going to be taken from you. And not living out your covenant promise, taking the seeds that you have and sowing them, not living that out, will not only cost you now, but also into your eternal future. It will cost you if you don't sow, because it'll be taken from you and you'll never get a harvest from that seed if you don't use it. No seed planting. Number 4, no harvest. And finally, number 5, and we're going to go more into this next week. I'm just going to give you a snapshot of what we're going to jump into next week. To conclude, number 5. Number 1, sowing and reaping is a law. It's a covenant promise. Number 2, sowing and reaping, it's perpetual. It never stops. Number 3, God never expects you to bear the weight for your provision. Number 4, no seed planting, no harvest. And now number 5, everything comes from seed. Everything? Yeah, everything. You, Miss Alma, you came from seed.
Right. Right.
So did I. These chairs in this room,
Seed.
it may not be like a crop of a piece of, ear of corn, but there was something that was put together and arranged in a certain way. That was seed. That's seed right there.
Amen.
Any thought you have, Ed, is a seed. Any idea you have is potential seed. Your time your talents, your abilities, your God-given and the ones you're developing, your actions. Hey, your words are seed. How you speak is seed. Life and death is in
Power of the tongue.
word is seed. Your prayers are seed.
Seeds.
There is so much seed already inside you. So much seed already inside you. Financial seed is only a small part of what we're talking about. Oh, this is part of the covenant. When Isaac had a 100-fold increase in a famine, that's a pretty good return on investment, isn't it? Some crops, the good soil, of the 4 different kinds of soil, some 30, some 60, some 100. Parable of the talents. The guy with 10 turned into 10 more. That was in 1 year. 1 year. 5 turned in 5 more. That's 1 year. 100% in both cases. And so the one guy had the 100% increase, and the guy with the 1 talent, that was taken and given to the guy with 10 because he had more ability. He had more. God said, you can handle more of this. So he just didn't do 100. He ended up with 110.
Wow.
Did you? He had 110% return in 1 year.
Yeah.
How are we going to fund the kingdom on 4% return a year? How are we going to go to these nations when we're just trying to beg for a 10% more customers? 5 foundations of sowing and reaping, which I consider for our purposes the kingdom principle. The 5 are, it's a covenant promise. It never stops. God bears the weight for your provision. If you don't plant, no harvest, and everything comes from seed. Now, as we transition out of the core teaching, here's what I'm going to ask each of you to do, and I'm going to ask you to do it also on Facebook. Before you jump off of here, I'm going to ask each of you, and I'm going to ask each of you once we go off live, what one activation, what one of these truths or a thought, whether I said it or not, what one thing, it doesn't have to be one of the 5, it's just something you're going to grab onto, what are you going to activate? What are you going to activate? When you hear revelation, you ask yourself, what does that mean to me? Interpretation. And then you figure out, here's what I'm going to activate on it. And that's what I want you to press into. What are you going to activate? And I want to hear from each of you. How are you going to activate whatever touched you tonight? Father, we thank you for this word. We thank you for this mighty, mighty word. May we always, from this day forward, wake up in the morning, go to bed at night, everything in our day be focused on the kingdom, the kingdom, the kingdom. Because your covenant promise was, when I seek first the kingdom and your righteousness, then all these things will be added. And from the very beginning, you said, sow and reap, sow and reap, sow and plant and harvest. So, Father, I pray that tonight, hearts and souls and minds and entire destinies are changed by this radical truth of seeking first the kingdom and nothing else. In Jesus' name.